well as their children, because this will be the generation of the fourth turning. We must prepare this generation for radical change. This program will identify the problems with each of our social constructs, how we as a country got to where we are, and identify the solution for a more moral and just society. Good afternoon and welcome to the program. I am your host, Carlos Carr Sr. Today is election day as I record this program. And I have a question. Are United States elections rigged? But before I answer this question, I must warn of the Dunning-Kruger effect, which is a cognitive bias that occurs when people with limited knowledge or competence in a certain area overestimate their abilities. And in short, a lot of people don't understand the American political landscape and how it works. And again, I'm asking you the question. Are United States elections rigged? I would like to introduce you to Shahid Bolson, an expatriate living in Turkey. Mr. Bolson is a controversial figure, but has nonetheless emerged as one of the most unique and influential public intellectuals of the Muslim world. What I like about Brother Bolson, he converted to Islam after reading the autobiography of Malcolm X, and that transformation that Malcolm went through after being introduced to Islam while he was in jail. You can find Shahid Bolson's content on YouTube under Middle Nation. And we will go to Brother Bolson now to hear his comments.
I mean, if you wonder why American society is so divided, divided in so many ways. It isn't just that the divides are deep, it's that the divides are so many. Black and white, race against race, advocates of this issue against opponents of this issue, even men against women and women against men. There isn't a single category within that society that doesn't have some corresponding nemesis. It's just divide and conquer, playing out domestically. And Democrats and Republicans is just another one of these divisions, because the country has been conquered by corporate economic imperialists. Look, I don't care who you vote for in November, because power doesn't care who you vote for in November. I've said it before. If you imagine that unelected power of the private sector is going to entrust the public with deciding how things are going to be run and who's going to run things, then you're living in a fantasy. It's absurd. America has subverted, sabotaged, and strangled democracies all around the world. They've been interfering with, tampering with, rigging elections across the globe for decades, from Haiti to Honduras, from Italy to Iran, from Syria to South Africa. They've toppled governments, assassinated elected officials, fixed elections, bribed and bullied and bulldozed democracies on every continent for a century. They don't think that any population in any country in the world can be trusted to elect leaders who will safeguard the interests of the American elite. So what makes you think that they're going to trust you with that power? They rig elections and install whoever they want in country after country, but somehow you think that they're not going to do that in your country. Well, how naive can you be? Listen, the election cycle in America is nothing but a mechanism for what you can call the campaign industrial complex, whereby billions upon billions of dollars of contributions, your money, are funneled into the private sector. I mean, when you donate to a politician or you donate to a candidate, where do you think that money goes? It goes directly to business. You're not doing anything but increase the revenue streams of consultancies, ad agencies, analytics firms, PR firms, media companies, social media companies, digital marketing agencies, events coordinators, on and on. This is nothing but the public providing basically an economic stimulus package to unproductive industries. It's a wealth transfer that you yourselves are participating in. You're literally just donating money to the private sector and getting nothing in return. Getting nothing in return except that you get to watch the most expensive fan fiction movie about democracy ever produced. I mean, look at the Democrats. Kamala Harris was just appointed as the nominee. She wasn't voted for. This is straight up succession, not election. There were no primaries. She hasn't had to outline her policy platform, and no one needs her to do that. All she has to do is to not be Donald Trump. This is the logic of demonization versus policy debate as a campaign strategy. No candidate has to win your approval as long as the whole election is framed in the lesser of two evils scenario. And what's the point of that? To make the pre-programmed win seem plausible, that's all. And to not leave any opening for dissent to manifest that might make the win seem implausible. Because, for instance, if voters actually have demands of this candidate or that candidate, and the candidate fails to address those demands, then it could cast doubt upon their eventual victory. And inevitably, if a candidate does address voter demands, well, that will always end up alienating some other faction of voters. So we don't talk about issues. We don't talk about how to deal with issues. We just rally behind our party's candidate in lockstep because the other party's candidate is literally the devil incarnate. When you're operating in the lesser of two evils framework, you're always going to have decidedly low expectations of your chosen candidate, and that's perfect when the election is already fraudulent in the first place. So this uncomplicates the rigging process. Yes, I said rigging, and don't think for a second, don't you imagine that that's a conspiracy theory, that the U.S. rigs elections. But between 1946 and 2000, America is documented to have interfered with, tampered with, malignly influenced or outright rigged at least 88 elections from Europe to Latin America to Asia to Africa. So again, if you think that they'll do this everywhere else, but your so-called democracy is pristine, I would have to ask you why you think so. Why would it be more important to the power structure to control the outcome of an election in, say, Guyana than it would be for them to control the outcome of an election in the United States of America?
Now, with that information out there, let's take a look at the U.S. meddling in elections. And these are some recent ones that you should remember. Libya, Muammar Gaddafi was taken out by the Obama administration. Iraq, Saddam Hussein was taken out by George W. Bush administration. Afghanistan, Hamid Karzai was installed as the U.S. puppet for president, and he is a former associate of Unocal, the oil company in California. In 2014, the U.S. interfered in the elections of the Ukraine, ousting the interim president. And you might remember in 2004, in Haiti, John Bertrand Aristide was ousted by the George W. Bush administration. And in Panama, Herbert Walker Bush ousted Manuel Noriega. And of course, the famous Bay of Pigs to assassinate and oust Fidel Castro in Cuba by the Kennedy administration. Now, there are several ways elections are rigged. And I just went through a few of those. First one being assassination, then vote manipulation, then voter manipulation, and propaganda. And I'm going to give you some examples of that here in America. In 1960, Joseph Kennedy calls on some of his bootlegging associates in Illinois to deliver the state of Illinois to his son's presidential bid, which of course was John F. Kennedy. And you can check that out. Sam Giordano did deliver the votes of Illinois to the Kennedys. In 1964, Kennedy is Lyndon Johnson becomes president after Kennedy is assassinated in 1963. In 64, Johnson runs for re-election and wins the office. Then in 1968, Martin Luther King was assassinated. Robert F. Kennedy was assassinated that June. And Robert F. Kennedy, being the front runner for the Democratic Party, was then replaced by the vice president of Lyndon Johnson, who decided that he was not going to seek re-election, Johnson. And that was Herbert Humphrey. Richard Nixon then goes on to win the 1968 election, defeating Herbert Humphrey. In 1972, after the Watergate scandal break-in the Democratic National Headquarters, but wasn't discovered until after the election, Nixon is reelected by defeating George McGovern. 1980, Ronald Reagan defeats Jimmy Carter with the October surprise, the holding of hostages in Iran. Now, the Carter administration had been working overtime trying to get these hostages removed and released, I should say, and thought they had a deal. Only to find out that there was a backdoor deal made by the Reagan campaign, which featured George Herbert Walker Bush as his VP, who was CIA, not to release the Iran hostages until Reagan, of course, wins the election and is inaugurated in January. Now, because of the fact that Jimmy Carter couldn't get the hostages released, along with the OPEC oil crisis that took place during his administration, that sent gasoline prices out of just off the charts and created oil shortages or gasoline shortages here in the United States, Carter lost that election. In 1988, George Herbert Walker Bush defeats Michael Dukakis by winning on a ad that was featuring a black felon by the name of Willie Horton, who was serving a life sentence for murder but was furloughed for a weekend, never returned back to prison, and then committed assault, robbery, and rape while he was out on furlough. That became a ongoing ad campaign on how Bush would be tough on crime. And anytime you hear a political candidate say, I'm tough on crime, they're actually saying, I'm tough on poor people, especially black and brown poor people. Propaganda. But Mike Dukakis didn't help his cause because he did a failed photo op riding in a military tank with a helmet on that the general public thought was kind of funny, hilarious. So they didn't take Dukakis very seriously, or he wasn't very presidential, you might say. In 1972, Bill Clinton defeats Bush on a campaign everyone questioned because Bush, the incumbent, did not run an aggressive campaign. And some believe Clinton and Bush might have had a secret backroom deal to win the presidency. And a lot of people may think that Bush, being Republican, and Clinton, being a Democrat, might be political enemies. Not true. They were actually friends and business partners. For more information on that, you should check out Zapata Oil Company in Florida and, of course, Mena, Arkansas, in the great state of Arkansas where Clinton was governor. Now, before I go on to the 2000 election, I have to hit on Diebold. Diebold is a company that created voting machines. And it was powered by software from a company called ES&S. Now, this company was out of Omaha, Nebraska, and on its board and was a managing partner of the ES&S was a gentleman by the name of Chuck Hagel. Now, Hagel, after he talks the state of Nebraska into buying his machine, then runs for the Senate in the state of Nebraska and wins twice. Now, moving on to the 2000 presidential election, George W. Bush defeats Al Gore in what's called the Hanging Chad Gate in the Florida elections. Now, in this election, the recount was stopped by the Supreme Court on a one-time decision, one-time ruling for Bush. No other presidential candidate has received this ruling except George W. Bush. Clarence Thomas' wife was on the transition team of George W. Bush. Anthony Scalia, his sons, the law firm his son worked for, which the young Scalia was coming up to be a partner within that law firm, tried the case in front of the Supreme Court. And they gave George W. Bush this one-time ruling to stop the recount in Florida, which it should have never went to the Supreme Court because the states control their election laws. Here's the other interesting thing that took place during the 2000 election. Diebold, remember that company, had election machines which caused the issues of the hanging chads, and a lot of people say the machines were actually switching votes. So if you voted for Gore, it would switch that vote to Bush. They also found out in Florida that the Secretary of State there had done a purge on the voter rolls of so-called criminals that they say were illegal to vote. And the law did take the vote away from felons, without a doubt. But the way they did this was that if your name was similar to any criminal that was a felon, they struck you from the voter rolls. And then in 2004, we have George W. Bush defeats John Kerry. And the most interesting thing here is that both Bush and Kerry were members of Yale's University ultra-secret fraternity, Skull and Bones. Kerry, because of the 2000 election, pledged that he would fight to make sure every vote was counted. But then when the issue of the vote, Diebo again, comes up in the state of Ohio concerning the voter machines switching votes, votes not being recorded, and in some precincts, they did not have enough voter machines to serve the county or the people in the county, especially in the county of college towns, where young people were voting for the first time. And what did John Kerry do? Concede the election. Never challenged the vote. He conceded the election. You can kind of see where I'm going with this. There is proof of past election fraud and rigging here in the United States. So the answer to my question is yes, without a doubt. United States elections are rigged. I'm going to wrap this up right here, and I'll be back because I have another question for you. If United States elections are rigged, who benefits? And we'll be back with that to answer that question for you on my next broadcast that will take place on the fourth Thursday of the month at 7 p.m. You can pick it up on KUAW.org. And if you listen to the low power FM radio station 100.5 KAJH, you will be able to hear it there. And you can also pick it up on my website, which is podpage.com/They Look at Us Differently. You can pick it up there as well. And with that, good night, and we'll see you in a couple of weeks. Thank you.
It was inspired by some whiteys on the moon. So I want to give credit where credit is due. This poem here, it's called Whitey on the Moon. And it was inspired by some whiteys on the moon. This poem here, it's called Whitey on the Moon. It was inspired by some whiteys on the moon. So I want to give credit where credit is due. Inspired by some whiteys on the moon. That poem here, it's called Whitey on the Moon. inspired by
Urban Panda Productions.